Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. We are glad to have you with us. We will look at everything going on with UGA right now, including how it turns the page from this past Saturday and starts a new chapter of the 2019 season, getting better and moving toward all of its goals, which, as we've been saying, is still intact. So we will see how Georgia does in taking care of all of that. Our buddy Mike Griffith going to be a part of the show today. There's some interesting stats that I think we can point to today that kind of suggest Georgia maybe being in a little bit better shape than maybe some of us felt going back to Sunday and Monday. Kirby Smart asked some tough questions about James Coley this week. His response in all those instances has been pretty interesting. We'll deal with that. And kind of a weird thing that Kirby may have said on the radio broadcast on Saturday that I've been made aware of. We'll talk about that. So we're going to cover a lot of bases and kind of figure out where Georgia is halfway through the week, heading towards the Dogs and the Wildcats under the lights on Saturday. And by the way, a couple of Kentucky offensive weapons that are probably worth paying a little bit of attention to. So we'll cover all those bases. I'm really glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
A little bit of drama with some of Kirby Smart's press conferences this week, and that in and of itself is kind of news because over the course of time, now I love the subject matter, so I'm always interested in everything that Smart has to say, but over the course of time, some of these press conferences can be a little bit monotonous. They can not exactly provide a whole lot of details one way or another. I mean, let's face it, the media who's there, and that's typically not me because I'm usually locked here in this box, our DawgNation World Headquarters studio, so I'm not in Athens too much during the week, but those who are there, it is their job to try to get interesting answers from Kirby Smart so they can deliver it to their audiences, the UGA fans who read or listen, watch their content. That's the media's job. Smart, I'm sure, thinks his job is to sometimes say as little as possible to keep the real inner workings of the Georgia program in-house, and that's always going to be the natural tension that exists. Press conference from the media who wants something, Kirby Smart, the coach who doesn't want to give it, and maybe a little bit more dramatic example of that, as I said a couple of times this week. Obviously, you know the backstory here. Georgia lost a game on Saturday, a game in which the offense didn't play well. There's a pocket of Georgia fans who'll say that the South Carolina result was actually something that had been building for a while, that Georgia hadn't played great offensively for the full game in any point in time this season. Maybe as a team hadn't exactly put four great quarters together at any point in time. And for some people, they're going to point the finger at James Coley. This is either because it deserves to happen or because every fan base is unhappy with his offensive coordinator every time that team loses a game. You can decide for yourself which one's more true when it comes to the Georgia fan criticism of Coley. But it has been substantial enough that Kirby Smart was asked about it first on Monday. Smart, however, not wanting to give the reporter in this case what he wanted. Take a listen to this.
Your assessment of James Coley to this point as an offensive coordinator, and also in general, how much do you sort of immerse yourself in offense, and how much of his play calling is influenced by basically what you want or something maybe you say to him in headphones?
Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to Kentucky right now. It's the biggest concern we've got, and we're going to focus on that. You know, I think the most important part of an offense is scoring points, and that's the most important thing. Now, how do I get to those points? Do I get to them through explosive plays? Do I get to them through long, methodical drives, which has so far been our MO? That's been the identity we have of long, methodical drives, and we've had some really good long, methodical drives. But at the end of the day, we're all judged by, number one, how do I score points, how do I protect the ball, and how explosive can I be? And that's what we're focused on.
So that's almost his, for those of you aware of this, Bill Belichick on to Cincinnati moment where the reporter there wants to say, Kirby, tell me about James Coley. Give me an evaluation. Give me a report card on Coley through a halfway point in this season. And Kirby Smart says, we've turned the page here to Kentucky, which is not the answer the reporter sought. And frankly, for the Dog fans who listen in on that kind of stuff, who watch it at our Dog Nation YouTube page and things along those lines, they want more of an answer from Kirby on how he views the job that Coley's doing right now and how much freedom and autonomy Coley has to run the offense the way that he wants to, or how much freedom and autonomy Jim Chaney had before that. Those are some things that Dog fans want to hear some more answers from Kirby Smart on, but in this case, Kirby Smart did not want to give it. Now fast forward to Tuesday, which was last night. Same question again. Kirby, you were asked on Monday about James Coley. Didn't quite get your answer on that. Would you mind going into a little bit more detail on that again? Here's an exchange with another reporter and Kirby Smart from last night.
James Coley, 6 games. What did you feel like he's done well as a coordinator, and what's kind of your overall evaluation of him?
I talked about it the other day. Again, I'm not judging and basing things on that. I mean, that's public opinion. I think that right now, offensively, we've got an identity that we've got to create more explosive plays. We cannot turn the ball over. And if you don't turn the ball over, you're really not talking about a lot of things, because when you go back and watch the tape, there was a lot of successful runs in there, as many as there were that weren't. And like I said, we've never lost a game that we were efficient in the run game. It's hard to make our efficiency chart, and we made it. Now, again, some of those are 3rd and 1s. You get a 2-yard gain, that's a successful run on 3rd and 1. If it's 3rd and goal and you score and it's a 2-yard gain, it's not good for your average, but it's great for your efficiency. And that's what we go off of.
So there's something that Kirby Smart says there that I think is pretty interesting. You know, when he's asked, hey, what do you think about James Coley? He says, I talked about this yesterday. Now, sometimes when Kirby gets asked a 2-part question, and sometimes he only answers one part of the question, you're kind of left to wonder, did he just forget the other part, or did he not want to answer that? Well, in the case of what Kirby said yesterday, remembering that he had been asked about this the day before and choosing not to answer it, pretty clearly this all seems intentional on Kirby Smart's part, that media, in some cases fans, want Kirby to evaluate James Coley through halfway through the season. The fact that the offense, even in addition to the turnovers that happened on Saturday, some UGA fans feeling like it didn't do too well, they want to hear from Kirby on that, and Kirby says, no, not right now. I'm not going to talk about that because we believe the offensive formula we have in place will work. It has worked. It's going to work again. Now, here's where I want to try to be just a little bit self-aware for a moment, because those of you who listen or watch DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resorts every day, have for a long time, you know that I believe that the Georgia offense needs to change, and I'm going to emphasize this phrase, a little bit. I don't think it needs to be drastically different. I don't think Georgia needs to wave a magic wand, become a Big 12 team overnight, or anything like that. I just think it needs to be a little bit different. I think Kirby's reliance on, as he calls it, long, methodical drives and efficient in the running game, that's really worked for Georgia, but sometimes I'm a little fearful that when the defense knows that's what you want to do and what you're trying to do, and then they game plan to take that away from you, I'm a little bit concerned about what I view as sometimes a lack of a counterpunch from Georgia in that regard. Admittedly, when it comes to Kirby Smart's overarching offensive philosophy, I've been a little bit critical of that, and I'm obviously I wouldn't be voicing that criticism if I didn't think I was right about that. However, the other thing that I feel like I need to admit and say to all of you today is, hopefully I am nothing if not self-aware, and the advice that I would give Kirby Smart in this situation is probably very, very different than the advice I'd give almost anybody else facing a similar situation where you have some critics. I mean, in this case, I am a critic of Kirby Smart. In this case, many of you have been critics of Kirby Smart. And to our friends and our family who are starting new ventures, opening businesses, creating something, anything like that where you have to kind of put yourself out there in the world, what do we typically tell people? We typically tell people to ignore the critics. Oh, listen, you can't listen to what people online say. You can't listen to what the critics say. You can't do that. You've just got to do what you think is right. That's what we tell almost everybody in every situation, and yet in this particular instance, hopefully we're all self-aware enough, I'm trying to be self-aware enough, to say that the advice that we would give to Kirby Smart is completely different than the advice we'd give to anybody else. To Kirby Smart would say, listen, Kirby, when you got, hundreds of thousands of Georgia fans all saying the same thing, they can't all be wrong, you need to listen to your critics, you need to change your offense. And Kirby Smart says, listen, I didn't get to where I am in life right now, making the millions of dollars that I am, leading a, huge institution like Georgia football by trying to keep my finger on the pulse of online critics and blowhard podcast hosts and people like that. I've got to have the courage of my own conviction and do things the way that I think they need to be done. And I'm not quite so sure that leads to good coaching, but it is probably an example of good leadership. And it kind of reminds me of something that Mark Richt was, very fond of saying. probably at least 3 different instances in his coaching career, he cited the famous words from Theodore Roosevelt. The most recent example I could find at Georgia was near the end of his tenure in 2015. There was an AJC column from Jeff Schultz about that. For those of you that are not aware of the Roosevelt quote, let me show it to you on the screen. Now, this is as highbrow as we'll ever get on this program. We don't typically delve into history too much, but here's Roosevelt from 1910. He says, "It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out where the strong man stumbled or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, who's been devoured. Win or lose, at least he wasn't one of those timid souls that knew neither victory nor defeat." That was Theodore Roosevelt in 1910. Mark Richt, I think, cited this 3 times at least during his coaching career, twice at Georgia, once when he was the coach there at Miami as well. And when Richt would bring that up, sometimes there'd be Georgia fan pushback on that, and seemingly reasonably so. Georgia fans saying, "Who are you to tell me that I can't criticize you because I'm not in your so-called arena? Because I'm not the coach, I'm not allowed to have an opinion on anything that goes on?" Well, in that column from 2015, when Rick started this again, he kind of pushed back on the pushback to the people who said that thought that he was saying they weren't allowed to criticize him. Let me show you this quote from Rick in 2015. Rick said, "I'm not saying people shouldn't say what they think. People have a right to say what they think. Everybody in the media has a right to say what they think. I don't get mad at anybody, if y'all wondered." That's Rick from 2015, AJC. You can go to ajc.com in the archives and read the full column for yourself. And what this has to do with Kirby Smart is the same thing's kind of true right now, that it remains to be seen if Kirby Smart's coaching philosophy is good coaching. I suspect that he's going to run into some problems if he doesn't change his offense a little bit. But in this particular case, I'm just a blowhard critic sort of outside the playing field, outside the arena. And it's probably good leadership from Kirby Smart to completely ignore what I think about this, and maybe to completely ignore what you think about this too. I mean, we all know what's at stake for Kirby. He is at Georgia at a time in which an unbelievable level of talent has been amassed. And if he manages it correctly, and if he manages the scenario on the field correctly, he can go down in history. Not just like modern day history, but all-time great Georgia coaches, all-time great college football coaches. He can go on quite a run here and give Georgia fans something they've been craving, which is a national championship. And ultimately, how do you achieve that? Well, I guess the best way to do it is to deep down do what you believe is best. And for Kirby, apparently he is very, very committed to the idea that he needs a lot of running and maybe only a little bit of successful passing. And some of the stuff that we think we see that would make the passing game better, maybe Kirby Smart just doesn't believe that. There's a chance he might be wrong from a coaching standpoint, but it's probably right from a leadership standpoint, and I guess we're all left to see where Kirby Smart takes this the rest of the way. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Available to you a lot of places, live on video, 10 a.m. DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And we're brought to you today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort and Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. 2 great casino resorts right there in the state of North Carolina, both less than a 3-hour drive from Atlanta, which means it's really easy to get to. Of course, you know Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. They got all the great casino stuff. Really hot slot machines, table games, baccarat roulette, also a 300-room hotel, and one that I really enjoy visiting every chance I get, the Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. It's a huge, huge venue, over 1,100 rooms. They got 10 dining options, a lot of great restaurants, all kinds of amenities. There's a spa, of course, the great casino that you all know about there as well. And coming up at the end of this year, the book is going to open. That's right, sports book, sports gaming is coming to Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort and Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. The book is going to be available for you, ultimate sort of sports bar, sports book experience. You can kind of settle in there, watch a bunch of games. It's going to be a great time. All kinds of TV showing all these games. Website to go to, Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee/casino/the-book. I know that's a big mouthful to say, but if you just search for Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort and the book, the sports book, I'm sure you're going to be able to find that. Great to have Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort as part of DawgNation Daily here today. Also, a couple other pieces of business to take care of. We have had a huge response to DawgNation Invasion coming up in Jacksonville for the Georgia-Florida game. A lot of you going to DawgNationInvasion.com to get your tickets for that. Luxury tailgate experience, all inclusive. That means food, beverage, everything else. Of course, the whole DawgNation team going to be there. Myself, Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel. well, Mike Griffith. The first 150 people to sign up are also going to get a Gator Hater t-shirt. And I know that's a huge commodity. A lot of you have been saying, when are we going to do these again? Well, that's right now. So go to DawgNationInvasion.com. Join us from 11:30 to 3:30 on the day of the cocktail party for our Dog Nation Invasion tailgate. It's all brought to you by Kroger, R.S. Andrews, and our friends at Peach Pass as Dog Nation gets ready to invade Jacksonville. Dog Nation Invasion of Jacksonville and Gator Hater t-shirts to be had. It's DawgNationInvasion.com for more details on that. All right, let me go around the doghouse here today. Brought to you by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And some of y'all know I'm a little bit of a dork. I like the stat blogs. And one in particular, which has been interesting this week, are our friends at Football Outsiders, who have, for the first time this year, through 7 weeks, presented their FEI ratings. These are efficiency metrics. I don't quite know how they're always tabulated, but there are some interesting things to be had and found in some of this kind of stuff. First of all, when it comes to what happened to Georgia on Saturday against South Carolina, pretty interesting to see that the Gamecocks defense, according to the just published FEI defensive efficiency metric, this is the number 6 defense in the country. So, listen, I don't think that excuses what happened to Georgia on Saturday, but for those of us, me included, who've kind of said South Carolina is a bad team at 3-3, defensively, at least according to Football Outsiders, they're not doing so badly here. The other thing that I kind of thought was interesting is Georgia's offensive efficiency metric right now is 13th in America, according to Football Outsiders in the FEI. It's kind of weird. For as many complaints we've had about the Georgia offense, statistically, it's always a little bit hard to find the numbers to back up the point we want to make. Now, there are some areas in which Georgia's not doing well. I know DJ Shockley saw on the SEC Network this week the fact that Georgia's 94th in the country in yards after the catch, for instance. But when it comes to the overarching efficiency metrics, the Georgia offense still doing pretty well. 13th out of 130 is not so bad. That puts you in the 90th percentile overall. However, there's something defensively that I think is pretty interesting here. Georgia 11th in the defensive efficiency metric right now. Compare that to another national championship contender like Oklahoma, which is just 45th, kind of giving you an idea that the Georgia defense is still helping it keep pace at what could be a championship contention level. But there's probably more improvement even in that area that needs to be provided, and some young players who might eventually provide that. One of those is the Georgia freshman outside linebacker Nolan Smith, who Kirby Smart yesterday had some pretty complimentary things to say regarding. Here is Kirby on Smith.
He made a heck of a play in the game late. He's an effort guy. You know, he runs that quarterback down late in the game, and just extremely a good effort. He had 2 times that he's, that he's right all over the quarterback as he's throwing the ball on boots and nakeds, and that was a really athletic guy. So I think he's improving rapidly. He played the counter well, which is, one of his pitfalls is going to be playing run against big people, and he did an excellent job squeezing and bouncing back. I mean, he continues to get better and show promise, and we're playing him quite a bit.
Our buddy Connor Riley mentioned Nolan today as well in his Good Day UGA piece about guys that may step up over the second half of the season. A more significant contribution from Nolan over the second half, I think, would be huge for Georgia. Let me give you one more quick stat here to back this up. I mentioned before that Georgia's 11th in defensive efficiency, according to the FEI metric at Football Outsiders. Let me dive a little bit deeper on that. When it comes to percentage of defensive drives that result in a touchdown, Georgia's 6th in America right now. But when it comes to turnover rate, percentage of defensive drives for Georgia that result in a turnover, fumble, or interception, Georgia's just 82nd at the moment. So what that tells you is that Georgia's been very good at preventing points from being scored, which is a good thing. And the next step for the Georgia defense to truly be dominant is to also be more impactful with negative plays and turnovers. And a guy like Nolan Smith stepping up, I think, gives Georgia a chance to really do that. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Of course, our friends at ESOG are a solutions-based company. So when it comes to issues like a cracked foundation or water creeping into your basement or just any kind of like dampness where it's not supposed to be, if it's a simple fix, they'll provide that for you. But if it's something more complicated, and sometimes when it comes to foundation issues, it can be more complicated, ESOG is going to be able to help you out as well because they have 2 full-time engineers on staff. That's why we trust our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and you can trust them too. And I would invite you to give them a call right now at 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. Dial that number. You can get in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll hear more from Kirby Smart later on in our program today, but for now, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Hope you enjoy our buddy Mike Griffith.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, Here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, Mike Griffith joins us here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Mike, you've been around the world of college football for a long time. You know how the timeline operates after a loss. For many fans on Sunday, it is just a total abject disappointment. Monday, a lot of that lingers. As you move towards Tuesday and Wednesday, kind of halfway through the week, there's start to be a little bit of a corner turn to maybe a belief that the sun will shine again at some point in time. And I think for DawgNation, it's kind of been the same thing, operating around that same kind of timeline here over the last few days. So with that in mind, I ask you, where do you think that Georgia goes from here? Not so much a specific prediction on the end of the season, but in terms of picking up the pieces and putting it all back together, give me an idea how you think the next couple of weeks unfolds for Georgia.
Yeah, well, to me, the spotlight shines on their season core. I mean, it's like it's isolated. It's like, okay, here it is. This is really what it is. Everybody's going to jam the box. Everybody's going to challenge Jake Fromm and his receivers. I mean, this is it. Backs to the wall. If Jake Fromm and his receivers can beat press man coverage, then Georgia still remains a championship contender. But if it's really as simple as playing press man coverage and forcing Jake Fromm to throw the ball to those perimeter receivers and Georgia can't execute that, that's a pretty major fail. Now, I'll say this, and I've wondered about this, and I hesitate to say this sentence, but would Georgia have won that game with Jim Chaney? Could Jim Chaney have come up with a plan B or a plan C or a plan D? And that's another area that we're looking at right now is what next for Georgia? How do you get your way out of this? When plan A doesn't work, where's the plan B? And unfortunately, I think Lawrence Cager was plan B. He won that game against Notre Dame with some big catches in the second half. He had 3 third-down conversion catches in the first half against South Carolina. He was the press beater. He was the guy that Jake Fromm could turn to. And if Lawrence Cager's out or limited, I think it comes down to what next and what can James Coley possibly scheme up to work around the solution to this problem that they're dealing with.
So I want to ask you about Coley in a minute to follow up on what you said there, but let me also address the wide receiver situation that you brought up. I've been emphatic now, really for kind of a long time, certainly coming off of what happened on Saturday, that Georgia, I believe, has 4 receivers who have a far greater chance of being dynamic than the rest of the group. And you know who it is. It's Cager when healthy. It's Pickens. It's Robertson. And I believe it's also Blaylock, even though he's been used less than the other 3 have been. I just think that when he has been used, he's kind of, paid off there. The other guys, this is backed up, statistically speaking. Their yards per target, their number of times moving chains or scoring touchdowns when thrown to is just much higher than the other guys. I think that the statistics speak for themselves on that. However, I also want to be at least a little bit self-aware and open to another possibility. The other big thing that I've been harping on Georgia missing right now are those long runs, 20-plus yard runs. Now, some of those are being stymied because the Georgia running backs aren't getting past the line of scrimmage in some cases. But when it comes to what we saw last year, big runs from DeAndre Swift in the Kentucky game, for instance, are the absence of downfield blocks preventing some 7 or 8 yard runs from becoming 20-yard runs and even 40-yard runs? I mean, I guess I at least want to be open to the possibility that part of the reason why the wide receiver rotation is as deep as it is right now, deeper than I think it should be, is that maybe if you're watching the film, eye in the sky type stuff, maybe you're seeing that the guys who are the best targets of catching the football aren't necessarily the guys who are the best at opening up for DeAndre Swift and Zamir White and Brian Herrien and James Cook. I at least want to be open to that possibility. How would you respond to that?
I think that's a good possibility. Kirby Smart mentioned it in his press conference yesterday. A couple of things that address what you just brought up. He said, when you're running 90 or however many plays you're in, whether they're 95, you can't have the same 3 or 4 guys out there every play. So there needs to be some degree of rotation. But he also said on the topic of the long run, BA, that it comes down to guys holding their blocks a little bit longer, and that makes the difference between a 10 or a 12-yard run and maybe a 70 or 80 home run by DeAndre Swift, as we saw last year. So, we circle all the way back, to when those 3 receivers went to the NFL, and J.J. Holloman got himself kicked off the team. That was costly. J.J. Holloman was one of the better downfield blockers on the team, and he was going to be the go-to guy. What he did was incredibly stupid and selfish, and his absence really hurts the football team right now. Georgie's tried to move on. I think Kirby did an incredible job adding 2 very capable graduate transfers in Eli Wolf and Lawrence Cager. I think Wolf has still not his shoes to an extent, enough of an extent to call that a successful transfer. And I think Cager's come in and done a remarkable job, but, this separated shoulder that he's been playing through, boy, that's tough. I mean, the guy had a separated shoulder, and he was out there playing football. That's pretty remarkable. And then he suffered a rib injury. But so now it comes down to the two freshmen. I mean, we're running out of chances here for Georgia, BA. The transfers, the freshmen. I think the guy that should be nervous is Cortez Hankton, the receivers coach. I mean, as you said, the best receivers have been the transfers and the first-year guy. Where's the player development? Where's the player development from Cortez Hankton, the receivers coach? He's the one responsible for guys like Matt Landers running the wrong route. Can't have that in year 3 of a receiver.
So let's be like armchair coaches here for a moment. Kirby Smart has now said multiple times, I've played some of the audio even on today's show, that, hey, you got to limit turnovers. We all know that's true. 4 turnovers against South Carolina was a killer. That's not even worth debating. Everyone knows that. But even beyond that, Kirby says, hey, you got to be more explosive. Got to add to the explosion, the explosive plays of the offense. Obviously, I'm not qualified to call plays at the SEC level. That doesn't mean we can't opine on it right now. Mike, how would you suggest more explosive plays be added to Georgia's arsenal right now?
Well, I don't think it's plays. I think it's players. I think I think it's a lot of the same plays they dialed up last year, but that aren't explosive because that receiver doesn't get that block 15 yards downfield, or because Matt Landers doesn't run under that throw that maybe Nicole Hardman would have from Jake Fromm earlier this year. I think it comes down to players. I think players make plays explosive. I mean, I've seen this many times before in other programs, where the team has the exact same offensive coordinator, and, one year they say, oh, man, what an explosive offense, and the next year it's, oh, it's not an explosive offense. It's because it doesn't have the same players. And, to me, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to receivers or running backs making people miss in space. It comes down to, quarterbacks, throwing to the right shoulder and throwing receivers open. I didn't think Jake Fromm did that, so I don't want to give him a complete pass, no pun intended, even though I think 2 out of the 3 interceptions we could attribute to Tyler Simmons not catching the ball that was right in his hands and knocking it 5 feet in the air, or, Matt Landers running the wrong route. Okay, so that's 2 out of 3 picks that we put on the receivers, but Jake wasn't on all day. Jake wasn't throwing people open. Jake was a little high or a little low to DeAndre Swift downfield, and he was missing. So it was everything. It was Trey Hill with poor snaps because he was getting his butt kicked by the South Carolina defensive lineman. That was affecting the snap. That was affecting the timing of the play. And Georgia just couldn't come up with the answer. So I know that's a really long-winded answer to your question, but I think it comes down to players and execution. I don't necessarily think there's many magic bullets. Now, maybe 2 or 3 a game. We saw Jim Chaney scheme up a really nice double move with max protection for Tennessee against Georgia. Maybe you pull 1 or 2 of those out of your hat. But for the most part, I think it comes down to putting players out there that can execute the plays.
Well, I don't completely disagree with that. I mean, as I said before, I think that Pickens and Robertson and Cager and Blaylock are likely more explosive than Georgia's other receivers, so they have the best chance of explosive opportunities. But let me cite Robertson in particular, though, as an instance of where I want to push back on you a little bit. If I've got the numbers right, and I think I do, Robertson was targeted 9 times on Saturday, but only goes for 5 catches. That ends up making the overall yards per target number not look all that great. Now, I don't know that Robertson's Georgia's best receiver, but because of his speed, I do believe he is now Georgia's most important receiver because speed seems to be lacking from that group at least a bit right now. So that's an example of, hey, it's more than just get the explosive player involved. I think you've got to find a way to scheme up a way to get Robertson more open. I mean, take the big throw near the to the end zone near the end of the game where that's just kind of a low percentage throw all the way around. Robertson's the kind of guy that has speed that ought to be able to run away from guys if you are targeting him properly. So while I mostly agree with you that you've got players, some who are just more explosive than others, you need to involve them more. Robertson, an example of an explosive guy, potentially explosive guy anyway, who may not quite be targeted in quite the right way. That's an example of where I think that Georgia does need to scheme him open a little bit more. Pickens is going to be blanketed with double coverage pretty much every single time. There's not a ton you're going to be able to do about that. But in Robertson's case, because of his speed, seems like there's something you want to be able to do about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma because one of the things that press coverage enables defenses to do is get to the quarterback and bring more pressures because they have the box loaded. So you have 5 guys in protecting, and you've got 7 or 8 guys in the box, and if you turn 2 of those guys loose, they hit your quarterback. And that's not a trade that Georgia can make, and that's kind of part of this, too, that we have to consider into this equation. If you're Kirby Smart, and I think most people would agree with this, every game plan has to start with protect Jake Fromm. Because without Jake Fromm, the ship goes down. You cannot allow your quarterback to get hit, and particularly when the drop-off is considerable as it is, and everyone can marvel about what Stetson Bennett did in a G-Day game, but at the end of the day, he's a walk-on junior college undersized quarterback that's not going to win an SEC championship for you. So you have to protect Jake, and you have to be mindful of that. So you can't really have, and I think you brought it up, some of these longer developing routes that it takes for a guy like Demetrius Robertson to get available or get open. So one of the things we talked about, well, what about the quick passes? So now we're talking about the him plays, as Kirby Smart calls it, where the ball's going to him no matter what, and Jake doesn't actually make the read and find the open guy. And now we're bringing it back to the philosophy. Do we want to channel the ball to one person that we think makes the best play or gives Georgia the best option? Or do you want to give Jake Fromm the opportunity to make a pre-snap read and get it to the person that he feels has the best matchup on that particular play? So as we can see, this becomes a very complex issue the deeper we delve into it.
There was something pretty interesting from the radio broadcast that I want to finish up with you on before we say goodbye to you, Mike. Before that, though, let me remind folks that tomorrow is a big day for DawgNation. We're going to be live at the Marlows in Dunwoody for our Marlows matchup. Myself, John Stinchcomb, and boy, John had some great things to say on our program on Monday. He's going to have even more to say this upcoming Thursday. We're going to be live Marlows in Dunwoody starting at 6 p.m. It's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. The address, once again, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. We'll have a live broadcast that starts at 6. We'll have a Q&A after that and just kind of hang out, enjoy some of the great Marlowe chef-inspired food, craft cocktails. Tomorrow night from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Marlows in Dunwoody for our Marlows matchup. And by the way, if you show up dressed in red and black and tell them you heard about it on DawgNation Daily, you get a free appetizer tomorrow for showing up in red and black and telling the folks you've been hearing about Marlows right here on our program, DawgNation Daily. So we'll see you tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Marlows in Dunwoody. All right, Mike, so I don't listen to the radio broadcast. I'm obviously sitting in the press box with you, but I've been made aware that before the game, Kirby Smart on Saturday was interviewed by Chuck Dial, who's the sideline reporter, and Kirby seemed sort of flippant and, kind of whatever at the time, but was like, hey, we got to get ready to play. And apparently Kirby wasn't happy with the pregame routine, pregame warm-up, didn't think it was as sharp as it needed to be on Saturday. So to me, that's kind of an interesting thing to hear from Kirby after the fact. I don't have the audio to play because it's kind of a right holders deal, whatever. But it did go down on the radio broadcast, which leads you to wonder how much of what may have happened for Georgia on South Carolina was aided by the fact that maybe the Gamecocks, for whatever reason, didn't have UGA's full attention. How much credence do you give to that on the basis of the fact that Kirby Smart essentially said on the radio broadcast before the game began that he thought his team needed to get ready to play the game? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's legit. I mean, he said it afterward. He thought that they need to be a little bit more physical in their warm-ups and bring a little bit more intensity. And, I've seen this happen before, yes. I've seen a highly favored team lose a noon kickoff. I mean, you think about it. If you're Georgia, you've been playing under the bright lights and bells and whistles and lights flashing and parades and you're all day and everybody, and now suddenly you've got this boring noon kickoff against a team you're supposed to beat by 3 touchdowns. And meanwhile, South Carolina's been, scheming, for a week off with, axe and swords and ready to storm the castle. And that's exactly what the Gamecocks did. Physically, they were able to match Georgia's physicality, and Will Muschamp was able to out-scheme his old friend. They pitched the perfect game. They hit all the fairways and hit all the greens. And, Georgia, for the life of them, couldn't stop hooking the ball off the tee. I think there's something to be said for that. I think it's a wake-up call. I think, you and Connor both, I think, have done a very good job of, reminding people that, I think 6 out of the last 8 teams that won national championships have lost a game during the regular season. The 2 that didn't were in the watered-down ACC. I think you've got to go back to an Auburn team in 2010 to find an SEC team that won a national championship with an undefeated mark. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. To me, the biggest thing that came out of this, and I think you did a great job with it on your podcast yesterday. You talked about it, and I wrote a little bit about Dan Orlovsky today, and goodness, he played for 5 teams in 13 years. If anybody knows when a team has done it, would be a journeyman quarterback. That said, I think that the fact that Georgia has identified the problem gives them a chance to solve it. I mean, if we were sitting here right now going, geez, I just can't quite figure out what it is, can't put our finger on what it would be maddening. it would be a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit. It's not. It's simple. It's completing passes against press coverage. And Georgia is either going to prove to have the talent and the coaching with Cortez Hankton, the receivers coach, to get this done, or there could be significant changes because Kirby Smart's not here to win 10 or 11 games. He's told you that. 24-5 is not good enough. It's not good enough to be sitting here with 7 or 8 games and the highlight of your season is to go down to Tybee Island and drink a few beers before you play Florida. That's old Georgia mentality. New Georgia is about winning championships and running the table. And Kirby Smart is one pissed-off guy right now. I'm just going to tell you that. And if it doesn't get solved real fast, things are going to change around there. And that's where Georgia football is at right now, B.A.
Well, Mike, we'll certainly look forward to reading a bunch more from you about this as we head towards the game, the Wildcats on Saturday and the Kentucky Wildcats, and then everything to come after that. Thanks for being with us here today. DawgNation Daily presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort.
Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
You hear Mike kind of mention the Georgia-Florida game there at the end. Listen, I'm not even in a position to even talk about that right now because let me just hold off my thoughts on, the idea of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party and coaches who want to cancel that at the moment. Let me just hold off on that. Instead, let me talk about the SEC through here, and of course, as we do, kind of some interesting things being said about some key figures around the country when it comes to the Georgia loss. First, though, let me tell you about my friends at the UGA Alumni Association. I know many of you kind of have been in a similar situation before where, you have this great community of people that you go through school with, and once you graduate UGA, you end up spread out all across the world, all across the country, certainly in many cases, and you're left to wonder kind of what your new social circle is going to look like. That can be kind of a challenging time for people as they embark on their sort of adult phase of life after being in college before that. Well, the good news is the folks in DawgNation are never too far away. I don't mean us, DawgNation. I mean DawgNation in general, the people that you graduated from UGA with, because there are UGA Alumni Association chapters all across our great country. I'm talking about more than 324,000 alumni as a part of 80 different alumni chapters, and there's probably one close to you there as well. So there's a website you can go to. It's alumni.uga.edu/chapters. Well, that's kind of a mouthful, so let me say it again. alumni.uga.edu/chapters. There are game watching parties. There are civic projects to participate in. There's good sort of corporate professional networking opportunities, and it's just a great way to go through life with people who kind of have a similar outlook, similar background, similar stories. That's what the UGA Alumni Association provides, and it can provide that for you as well. alumni.uga.edu/chapters for more details. So I've counted at least 3 different non-Georgians or folks not connected to UGA who've sounded off on Georgia losing to South Carolina. Now, in every one of these instances, they're not volunteering this. They were asked those questions. Nick Saban was asked about it. Saban saying it just goes to show the value of not overlooking any opponent, essentially using that for his own benefit here as a message to his own team of, hey, did y'all see what happened to Georgia? They weren't paying attention to South Carolina maybe, and they lost that game. Not surprising to hear Saban taking that tact. Dabo Swinney was asked about this, not so much from the standpoint of Georgia, probably a little bit more from the standpoint of the team that won, his in-state rival, South Carolina. Dabo kind of took this as an opportunity to say kind of the same thing of anything can happen in college football, but he made sure to point out the fact that North Carolina beat South Carolina and South Carolina beat Georgia in sort of a passive-aggressive way. It seemed like he was trying to say a little something about the ACC beating a team that was able to then beat one of the top teams in the SEC, so Dabo taking kind of a self-serving tact on that too. Someone else who was asked about the game, and he didn't have much to say about it, but former Georgia quarterback Justin Fields was asked by the gaggle there in Columbus, Ohio, his thoughts. He didn't say much, but he said that he felt bad for Georgia, and he said he hoped that Georgia bounces back from that. Kind of a short, terse statement, but certainly no grandstanding from him, certainly no attention-seeking quote from him. He sort of answers it in a classy way and moves on, which just kind of goes to show you. There's a lot about the Field situation I didn't always love when it was going down. Maybe some of the stuff from his camp, maybe some of the way in which he was handled while he was here at Georgia. But for Fields in particular, he has never had a misstep in this entire thing. He's been pretty careful with everything he's ever said. And so I guess from that standpoint, you tip your hat to him a little bit there that he kind of sidesteps that quote and moves on to something else. And so you got a lot of folks that are not Georgia being asked about the Georgia loss to South Carolina at the moment. I also thought this was kind of interesting. One of the online sports books that does Heisman odds has kind of re-released some stuff here. And for the most part, you've got Sam Ehlinger, Texas quarterback, no longer having posted odds. Jake Fromm, after the game on Saturday, in a lot of sports books, his odds are no longer posted either. Trevor Lawrence is kind of falling off the pace here. It looks like, based on the odds that are being posted by most sports books, some of the market leaders in particular, this race now is down to 5. You've got Tua Tagovailoa, you've got Joe Burrow. Burrow may actually be the actual favorite to win the award at the moment. Jalen Hurts from Oklahoma, obviously. Justin Fields is a part of this, and Jonathan Taylor, the Wisconsin running back. So the overall feeling is, among a lot of the betting public, it's the Heisman Trophy is now down to those 5 guys. And when you look at the way that a lot of these offenses have performed, hard to argue against that right now. We've given attention to at least 4 of these names a pretty good bit. Taylor in Wisconsin, boy, that's a pretty good team right now on the basis of almost any statistical measure you're going to look at. The advanced stuff, the more old-school basic stats. This is probably as good of 2 Big Ten teams. Ohio State, which has been well documented, Wisconsin also. This is a pretty good-looking team right now. Kind of interesting to think about how they may play out in terms of the battle of maybe seeing those 2 teams play twice before the year is done. Then one more SEC through story to get to. Sounds like coming out of Columbia, South Carolina, that Ryan Hilinski, the quarterback who was injured against Georgia, when that injury took place, it seemed like it was going to be pretty serious. Adam Anderson goes in trying to make the sack and end up getting him accidentally just a little bit low. And at the time, it looked a pretty serious injury, but it sounds like Hilinski's going to be okay. So we'll monitor his progress here and see if he's able to go against the Gators on Saturday. If so, that obviously gives South Carolina, who's really only about a touchdown underdog, a chance to maybe pull another upset, this time in Williams-Brice Stadium, which will be rocking and rolling after the Georgia game on Saturday. Carolina and Florida may be one worth watching there just at least a little bit. Could be kind of interesting, especially if Hilinski really is indeed able to play. And for now, we'll make that your SEC through. And I kind of want to get back to something I was talking to Mike Griffith about a moment ago here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resorts. So there was the weird moment from the radio broadcast. I've heard about this. I can't play the audio for you, but it was essentially Chuck Dowdle asking Kirby whatever pregame, kind of like the same sort of normal interview you always get. And Smart was a little bit fired up, saying he essentially insinuating that he wasn't happy with the warm-up, saying, his team's got to get their behinds ready to play, although he didn't use the word behinds. He used a different word than that. He was not happy whatsoever. And when you see Georgia go out and play the game the way that it did, you're kind of left to wonder, well, was this Georgia just kind of sleepwalking through this game? Was this, as Mike Griffith mentioned before, noon start? Was this just a team kind of going through the doldrums of the middle of the season, especially for some young players who haven't played as intense of a level of football for as long as they've been asked to do that during their first year of college? Is that kind of what's going on here? Now, it's worth pointing out that in other instances when Smart's kind of talked about the same subject, he hasn't necessarily said the same thing on that. In fact, he was asked during the post-game press conference on Saturday if he saw this coming, and Smart's answer was no, he didn't. Here's Kirby again.
No, I thought we had a good week of practice. I thought we had good practice prep. I thought we might be a little bit, tired, but we went a little lighter on Thursday because of that. And they did. They played a really good football game. But at the end of the day, we gave them 4 gifts. And 4 gifts, I think maybe 3 of them on our side of the field or 4 of them on our side of the field. You got to turn those into points.
So what I'm going to say now, I'm going to say strictly as a fan and not as a so-called analyst or professional broadcaster type. Speaking as a fan, if I had any reasonable certainty that Georgia did lose the game because they were overlooking South Carolina because they were not paying attention to the Gamecocks, honestly, given all the other potential answers to that question, this would be, for me, by far and away the most favorable. Because to me, it's the easiest to correct, right? I mean, as Nick Saban said a moment ago, hey, this just goes to show you don't overlook any opponent. That's sort of like the typical parable that coaches tell players, and it's kind of a tradition in college football of players not really listening to that necessarily, but it is sort of is what it is. If that really was the case, if that really was the reason that Georgia lost to South Carolina, boy, that'd be great because you can easily fix that. Just be more focused, more attention. Mike mentioned the intensity with which you go through pregame warm-ups, the way in which you show up for a noon game. That's pretty easy to fix. I'm not quite so sure that's the answer in this case, but if it was, that'd be great news because anybody can just sort of be more intense or more focused. I mean, anybody can do that. It's the flip side that's a little harder to correct, finding a way to be more explosive on offense, finding a way to kind of manage the philosophy of your offense so that it maximizes your potential. Those are challenges that are a little bit more difficult to deal with. And so given the choice of a good team not focused or a good team not maybe quite as sound, you would obviously rather be the good team that's not quite so focused there. So I'm not quite sure where that leaves you on that, but it was kind of interesting to hear Kirby Smart before the game on Saturday say that he wasn't quite happy with the look that he saw in his team's eye right before that game kicked off. My guess is, now it's a later start on Saturday, so not an apples-to-apples comparison, but in a later start against a team like Kentucky, which is thought to be as big an underdog almost as South Carolina was last week, I think we see a little different level of intensity and energy from Georgia against the Wildcats. And if I had to guess, I think that same thing will be true for every game for the remainder of the season there as well. Okay, we'll wrap up our program here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. One more time, let me remind you, big doings tomorrow for us live at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. It starts at 6 p.m. for our Marlowe's matchup. Myself, John Stinchcomb, talking some UGA football with you on our video broadcast at first, and then kind of a special Q&A. Now, John was very, very, very strong words off the cuff this past week. My guess, on the record this past week when he was with us on our program on Monday. No telling what he says off the record, off the cuff on Thursday. It's going to be worth seeing tomorrow, 6 p.m., Marlowe's Tavern, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. That's the address, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. All eyes on the cocktail party coming up in a couple weeks there as well. Y'all know how much I love the game, love the trip, love everything about it. Love the fact that it's been 1,082 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater, and we think that number's going to keep climbing. We look forward to celebrating it with all of you. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video. Time now for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. I was looking at the forecast. Do you know that tonight it's going to get down to about 42 degrees at some point in time, mid-40s at some point time tonight? That means for a lot of you, you'll be clicking on that heat. That furnace will be firing up for the first time tonight, at least for many of you. Now, if it was up to me, I'm hot-natured. I don't need a furnace. I don't need heat, but I'm not the only one who lives in my house. There are 3 other people, and I get outvoted 3-1 on this kind of stuff almost all the time. My family likes the house to be warm and toasty on cold nights, and that means when we fire up our furnace, we all kind of have that thing of, is this going to work the way it's supposed to? Is there something wrong with it? Is it safe enough? Because that's a big issue there as well. Well, my friends at R.S. Andrews can certainly take care of all that for you, give you the peace of mind that you need for you and your family. It's the $99 furnace safety checkup. It can get your system just to make sure everything's ready to go for the cold weather season, because it'll be cold briefly tonight, but pretty soon the cold comes and then it stays, and that means the heat's running all season long, and you want to make sure yours is ready. So rsandrews.com for more on that. Connor, why don't you hop over here and join us a little early today, and then we're going to kind of get off the air here, so we'll kind of clean up the radio stuff in just a little bit, if you don't mind, because I want to hear from you a little bit in the early going. We'll try to run through like a good 20 minutes worth of comments or so, and then we're going to pop off the air a little bit after that. So while Connor gets in place and gets everything figured out, I will let you all have the floor and talk as much as you want to. Bulldog Freakzoid says, I love my dogs, but dog fans need to wake up from the false pitch that Kirby did. So apparently Bulldog Freakzoid not too happy right now. Jeremy Bottoms, though, says, the Dogs are pups against a team with a dual-threat quarterback. We'll find that out on Saturday, because Georgia's going to get a chance to play another running quarterback. Now, this one, at least when Bowman's in the game, is a lot more of a runner than a thrower. But certainly they'll have a chance to stop a running quarterback again on Saturday. Elite GB says, like Fromm hasn't done anything for us. Y'all need help. He's done more than anybody before him. Obviously, Elite GB not liking some of the criticism that Fromm has taken as of late. Nicholas King says the Kentucky quarterback looks kind of scary, pure athlete. Yeah, it's kind of funny. At the beginning of the year, Bowman was getting a lot of hype from Kentucky because he made like a lot of highlight catches. If I have his backstory correct, he played basketball somewhere else before playing football at Kentucky. He's like a transfer player. And if I have that part of the backstory correct,
It's another wide receiver there. He played basketball at Iowa, but he is still at wide receiver. Bowden has been with the program for a while and was a highly touted recruit out of the state of Ohio who actually picked Kentucky instead of Ohio State.
So there's that then. The point is, a lot of highlight catches for him early in the year, and I didn't think too much about it, but I've had a chance to watch him a little bit more closely lately, and boy, he is a really impressive athlete. I know Kirby Smart yesterday compared him to Hines Ward. That, for me, may be taking a little bit too far in terms of the literal specifics of the comparison, but in terms of the kind of dangerous threat he can be, I don't think that's too much of an exaggeration. You have to know where he is at every moment, no matter what position he's lined up at. They've actually been fairly athletic offensively, although Kentucky, its record sort of says what it is. It is not it's not a great team right now.
I get, maybe where the concern comes from, but what has Georgia's defense shown you against dual threat quarterbacks this year that says they can't, corral them or stop them? Dakereon Joyner did absolutely nothing, and that was kind of South Carolina's point. They're not going to let him turn the ball over. He didn't really run all over Georgia at all. Ian Book didn't really do that either, and Georgia, I think, purposefully said, these guys were going to try and make you beat us from the pocket. And to be quiet, I know South Carolina won that game, but Joyner did nothing throwing the ball that day either. So,
I think my only concern would be for a Georgia offense, and I'm still not quite so sure about, is that Kentucky, at its couple skill positions, is athletic enough to extend a couple drives long enough to shorten the game just a little bit, to kind of keep it inside of 4 touchdowns, inside of 3 touchdowns, and just maybe make the game a little closer than a lot of Georgia fans want it to be. They want to see an emphatic response to a loss from this past Saturday, and I guess there is part of me that wonders if Kentucky can be at least good enough offensively just to shorten the game enough that Georgia fans are kind of left with what does this really mean? Maybe not quite as dominant as we wanted it to be coming off the heels of what was certainly not a dominant performance against South Carolina. Obviously, I don't think that, you're talking about an offense for the Wildcats good enough to win the game, good enough to shorten the game. I think there's certainly a possibility that's true.
Do you think Kentucky gets a rushing touchdown this week?
I mean, that streak's going to end at some point in time.
What if it doesn't?
I mean, we said this during the regular show. Georgia right now, it reminds me a lot of the 2017 defense in a lot of ways in terms of that group was fantastic in terms of limiting points and limiting yards. I want to say they finished 6th in the country in points allowed that year. Certainly they were in the top 10. This is kind of that same kind of defense where right now, and I gave you the stat, they're 6th in America in percentage of drives that result in a touchdown defensively, 82nd, though, in percentage of drives that result in a turnover. Now, I don't care about the turnovers as much as I care about the sacks and tackles for loss, but certainly the same kind of stuff that generates pass pressure also leads to turnovers there as well. So that's the next step for this Georgia defense for me. Go from just being stingy to also being impactful, and as Connor wrote about and as Kirby talked about yesterday, guys like Nolan Smith, Tyson Campbell when he returns, they give you a chance to do that. We saw around this time a year ago Jordan Davis become a very important part of the Georgia defense as a freshman, and second half of the year there probably will be some guys kind of step up in that same regard for the Dogs, and I think one of the ways you'll measure that in terms of does a stingy defense also become
a disruptive one.
A disruptive defense. That's probably a good way to say that.
Because as I think it's worth bringing up, those 2 games against those dual threat quarterbacks, Book and Joyner, in the second half, Georgia had 0 sacks in both those games. And, part of that might be the philosophy of, hey, instead of just rushing straight up field, try and contain him and sort of keep him in the pocket. But and Kirby and Aziz touched on this, and I'll have a story on something on this on Nolan coming up a little bit later today. But they've been close a lot. But what do they sort of need to do to go from just getting their hands on guys and allowing the quarterback to just throw it away to actually bringing them down? Because there's a specific play late or in the fourth quarter, the South Carolina's first drive of the fourth quarter. Nolan sort of has his hands on Joyner. If he's able to pull him down, it would have been a loss of 16 yards on the play and would have gone, a 4th and 13 to a 4th and 29, and you're giving that Georgia offense a little bit more room there. Now, who knows what Georgia would have done with that because the offense just completely stunk on Saturday. But, that defense, if they're able to make those just, get there a half a second sooner, make those sort of disruptive plays, I do think shorter fields will help this offense out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Steve Schaffini also mentioning, I compared this Georgia defense to the 2017 Georgia defense, while statistically it looks somewhat similar right now. Steve points out, obviously, the 2017 defense had that game-wrecking individual player in Roquan Smith. And I said after that season was over with that my hope was that Georgia never needed one individual player as much as it needed Roquan in 2017. Obviously, Georgia doesn't make the playoff had Roquan gotten hurt and missed significant time that season. And yet, I do kind of find myself here in 2019 now saying, man, it'd be great if this Georgia defense could grow a star out of this group. And I don't mean star meaning fifth defensive back. I mean like superstar type play. Yeah, they
have a few of those.
They have a few stars. I mean star. Aziz is close to being that guy. Nolan, on the basis of some what he showed you on Saturday, reminds you that he can still be that guy. I think that in his own way, Eric Stokes is kind of, like that guy. Statistically, he's had a very good year. Maybe just waiting on those interceptions to kind of come in for him a little bit more. But, to have a real star player emerge over the course of the second half of the year, I think is one of the ways you do become a more disruptive defense. No one's going to be Roquan in 2017. Georgia may never have an individual player, at least for the foreseeable future, that plays as well as Roquan did that year. That's how special I think Roquan was. But if you could see someone have that sort of Jordan Davis metamorphosis at another position that's kind of more measured by stats, boy, that could change the fortunes here just a bit.
So I sort of wonder, with the way the Georgia defense has been run now for a while, I do wonder if the only place where it's obvious that you can have a true superstar on this defense is at that inside linebacker position with the way they play. Because I think Aziz has been outstanding so far this year. I think he's been everything that's advertised. But sort of with the way they rotate and the way they sort of coach their pass rushers, Lorenzo Carter, Davin Bellamy were great players, but they never posted huge sack numbers. DeAndre Walker, I think, was an even better pass rusher in terms of skill than Carter or Bellamy, but he never really had massive numbers either. So, I sort of just wonder if, that true star, that true sort of, nationally known name, and this was true for a long time at Alabama too, those early defenses, the best player on those teams was always the middle linebacker, Rolando McClain, C.J. Mosley. Those were the guys that they sort of wanted to shine and star. And, Tay Crowder is a very good player and he's playing well. I don't know if he and Monty Rice are sort of that star quality right now.
Jimmy Guthrie says FPI, which is the ESPN analytics measurement, gives Georgia an 18% chance of winning out the rest of the regular season. Dogs can do it. First of all, there are three different, there may be even more, but there are three that I know of that kind of do this stuff. FPI is among the most famous because ESPN publishes it. You hear me reference Bill Connelly. He has his SP that kind of does the same thing. The Football Outsiders folks have their deal that kind of does the same thing. And I've talked about this before. 18% chance to win out is actually fairly high. It may not sound, all that high, but in terms of what is still 5 regular season games left for Georgia, is it 5 or is it 6? It's 5 regular season games, right?
No, it's 6. They're 5-1.
Okay, so 6 regular season games. 18% chance of having all 6 of those things break the same way is actually a fairly high percentage. Now, it's not the kind of overwhelming percentage that allows someone like me to say, I guarantee it's going to happen. We can't do that. And admittedly, I may be a little less confident after the half a season than I would have been before the start of the season. But in terms of the actual reasonableness of this taking place, Georgia is very much in it right now. Very much in it. They're still going to be a favorite against Florida. They have a strong chance of still being a point spread favorite versus Auburn. And all you got to do is kind of just go out there and do it from that. So while I think I've seen things through 6 games that would lead me to be concerned, in terms of being done, no, I think that Georgia, statistically speaking, is far from done. If you've got the, as I cited during the regular show, number 13 offense in the country, number 11 defense in the country, according to the Football Outsiders FEI, which is their version of FPI, if that's where you are in the mix for this. And it's just a matter of if the flaws that we've noticed are fatal flaws by the end of the year.
Yeah, and, the two big things, because we did a cover 4 in this yesterday. The two big issues right now are the offensive line and the wide receiver position. I think Jake had a bad game, but that's pretty clearly the player Georgia fans saw against South Carolina is not the player that Jake Fromm is. He's going to have I'd be comfortable saying that's probably the worst game he's going to play this entire year. As far as those other two issues, offensive line, I've said this, John Stinchcomb has said this, they just need to find their 5 best guys and just play them. I know they've been rotating Cade and Ben Cleveland. That has to stop. If Solomon Kinley, this ankle's been a recurring injury for him now, and it makes me wonder if it's sort of similar with what happened with Ben Cleveland a year ago, where he had a leg injury early in the season, and he was sort of never really the same player after that. Part of it makes me wonder, because Kinley's game's not even really predicated on movement as it is, and if he's, hindered by that, then that makes me wonder how he'll be for the rest of the year. So Georgia just has to find and play its 5 best offensive linemen. I think that's an easier fix than this wide receiver one, where I've pumped up Blaylock as much as anyone, but he is still a freshman, and there are still a lot of things he has to learn, and sort of the adjustments to the physical aspects of the game that he has to make.
Would you be bored to death if I gave you a couple quick offensive line stats that I find to be interesting?
Sure. I love a good line play.
Okay, so all of you listening on this, because I'd actually like to get all of your opinion on this. So picture a running play for a moment. Like, how much credit do you give to a running back? How much credit do you give to an offensive lineman? Well, most of the statisticians will say that the first 4 yards of any running play belongs to the offensive line. That makes sense, right? You open up the hole, running back goes for 4 yards. Beyond that, they start sharing some of the credit equally. Then finally, at the 10-yard mark, if a 10-yard run becomes a 50-yard run, then 40 yards of that belong to the running back. You may quibble with that a little bit, but we kind of generally, that makes sense to us, right? Mm-hmm. You open up the hole, those first 4 yards belong to the offensive line. Well, when it comes to those so-called line yards, the first 4 yards of any run, Georgia is first in America, according to Football Outsiders that tracks this kind of stuff. They average 3.34 line yards per rushing opportunity. When it comes to opportunity rate, which is the percentage of time you get 4 yards when 4 yards is available, Georgia is second in the country in that metric. They get at least 4 yards 60.6% of the time. However, when it comes to power success rate, let me give you the definition of power success rate as defined by Football Outsiders. It's the percentage of runs on 3rd or 4th down with 2 yards or less to go that achieved a first down or a touchdown. Georgia, in that regard, this is very interesting to me, is 104th in America, converting power opportunities just 60% of the time. What is that about?
Can I tell you?
I want you to. That's why I'm asking.
I have a theory here,
okay.
And John sort of touched on this, and having gone back and watched it, you see it a couple of times. So when the defensive linemen are lined up right in front of you, it's a lot easier to block them and know how to block them. And I think that explains why Georgia is doing so well on line yards. They're doing a great job of blocking those defensive linemen, those guys where they know where they are before the snap and they know exactly how to get to them and how to block to them. Mm-hmm. The reason the power rate is lower and I think you're not seeing those necessarily explosive run plays is because for whatever reason the Georgia offensive line is having a hard time blocking those linebackers because in short yardage situations, you're more likely to have linebackers coming up and blitzing and stuffing the holes. And the reason the reason that they're not sort of getting those explosive plays is they know where those defensive linemen are going to be and how to block them. But when they get to that, when the guards and tackles and occasionally center get to that second level, they're either not properly locating linebacker or there's just an issue of miscommunication when the linebacker is able to stop and turn what could potentially be a 10 to 15 yard gain into a 4 yard gain. Yeah. And I think, that's something where, Trey Hill had a really tough game on Saturday. I know people have mentioned a few snaps, and I actually think his struggles as a blocker might be impacting his, his snapping ability because, as a former center, I do feel somewhat qualified to talk about this. If you are constantly worrying about trying to get to your guy quick enough or trying to block your guy enough, you start not necessarily focusing on getting the snap up and properly doing it and getting it to where it should be all the time. And I think that might be an issue affecting it there. And this is Trey Hill's first time as an extended period as a starting center. And, communication is a big issue there, not just in calling guys out pre-snap, but also being able to identify and locate those guys beforehand on run plays and sort of, key on them and know, that's a guy I got to scoop off and go pick up. And, that's just something Georgia, its center and guards have to get better at, I think, is identifying those linebackers and then picking them up.
I also wrote about this before the season began. It was part of my Own the East series on the offensive line that, statistically speaking, what you see from the Georgia offensive line this year is actually pretty similar a year ago too. For a full season, great in almost every category except for the so-called stuff rate and sort of short yardage situation. Connor gave you a pretty good prescription as to why. I would also add to that Georgia last year wasn't great pass protection on 3rd and long. They've actually been a little bit better in that regard this year, but big, good offensive line in a predictable situation, I do think is a challenge for that group. And then the fact that they struggled in 3rd and long on pass protection a year ago. By struggle, I mean they were like, I think they were 75th or something like that, which is right about the national average. But everything else is like exactly where you think it would be. First, top 5, top 10, stuff rate, 3rd down pass pro. Everybody knows what's coming. Mm-hmm. Big offensive line is negated a little bit by a predictable scenario.
Right, and so that's why, Kirby, I think, in postgame he harped so much on, hey, Georgia was getting 4 yards plus on 1st and 2nd down. And, people want to bring up the sacks, but I know at least 2 of those were not the offensive line's fault. They were on downfield guys. But, there were a couple plays that didn't end in sacks that the offensive line didn't exactly do a great job of. The interception, Cade and Isaiah, there was an issue there that allowed Kinlaw to get upfield and sort of force an errant throw from Jake that got returned for a pretty big touchdown in the course of that game. And then I went back and saw the 4th and 6th play because the SEC officials highlighted it. The one where Wolf drew a holding penalty. Georgia's very lucky that happened on that play because, 1, there was nobody open at all across the field on that play, and 2, as Jake was releasing that ball, there was a guy in his lap, sort of because Cade, and there was an issue communicating with Andrew Thomas there. So, again, the offensive line right now, it is an issue to the people saying that it's not. I would just encourage you to go back and rewatch that game. Javon Kinlaw did whatever he wanted in that game, but I do think it is an easier fix than necessarily what we see with the wide receivers right now.
On YouTube, Tram Dog, Terrence Allen, ABC Chiropractic all mentioning the same thing when it comes to some of these rushing play stuff. I think that Georgia did miss Brian Herrien on Saturday, and I'm not quite so sure that Brian Herrien's not an important part of the second half of this season. You wrote about breakout guys today. I don't know that Herrien qualifies as a breakout because he's been on the team for a while and he's played a decent amount, but in terms of would not surprise me if he's a big part of the story by the time the month of November is done. Herrien's kind of one of those guys.
Right, and, Zamir White did some stuff on Saturday, but, Herrien, even from Zamir – Herrien's just different. He's not as big as Elijah Holyfield is, but that dude runs hard. That guy runs through tackles. He did it last year at LSU where he bowled over a guy, against Texas in the Sugar Bowl. And you saw in the Tennessee game, he's not Swift level athlete, but he turned a play that should have been a loss into a 40-yard gain. And I do think that, he's a guy who I think can do some things for Georgia just in terms of, turning a 4-yard gain into a 6-yard gain, turning an 8-yard gain into a 12-yard gain. I think he's a guy who's got the size and sort of the shiftiness to maybe make some of those linebackers miss and sort of turn those 4-yard gains into 8-yard gains.
Let me give you an example of how I think things could go for Herrien. Here's Elijah Holyfield from a year ago. So first, however many games of the season, 5 attempts, 9 attempts, 8 attempts. Did get 14 versus Missouri, 16 versus Tennessee, just 6 versus Vanderbilt, just 7 in the loss against LSU, where I believe he dealt with an injury, or Georgia just stopped using him. It's hard to really know. But then after that, 20 attempts against Florida, 18 attempts against Kentucky, 15 versus Auburn. Didn't play much against UMass, 9 attempts against Georgia Tech, 14 versus Alabama, 12 versus Texas. Second half of the season, Elijah Holyfield became a much bigger part of the Georgia offense. This running back group for Georgia now probably a little deeper than that one was a year ago because of the health of Zamir White. But we've always felt like Herrien and Holyfield were in kind of the same category. And Elijah Holyfield was definitely more of a part of Georgia's offense in the second half of the year than he was in the first half of the year. And even in a deeper running back core, I'm not quite so sure the same thing does end up being true about Brian Herrien.
Right. Zamir having 12 carries, I think it was a little higher than some people thought. But I wonder if and Swift had 23 carries in that game. That's the most he's ever had in a game. Herrien, he had back spasms, a flare up on Friday, and if you've ever had those, it's not necessarily a long-term thing. It can be, a 48-hour, 72-hour thing, but it's just like you can't do anything. And, he's been out of practice. We've seen him as long as those back issues don't flare up, the hope is that he's going to be able to play. But, Georgia named him a captain before that game, I think. And granted, that's done on Thursday, but I think they were fully expecting Harrion to be a part of the offense before that back issue sort of just came out of nowhere.
Philip Jordan Wells on Facebook. We're going to do a few more on Facebook, then we got to go, y'all. He says, I've noticed that a lot of teams run cross stunts in the center guard gaps when Hill's at center, going back to last year. In fact, I guess he must mean the Kentucky game there on that. And when it comes to playing those games in the line of scrimmage, and Connor talked about that a minute ago, Kirby's addressed this too of that seems all fine and well to kind of, give a different angle and a slant for the big Georgia offensive linemen so they can't just maul you. But Kirby says that has a way of backfiring on you too, which I imagine probably is true. It certainly seems like that teams are trying to counter. Now, in South Carolina, not quite so much because they were big on their defensive line. But it seems like teams are trying to counter Georgia's size with speed there, the defensive line of scrimmage. But to Kirby's credit, and this is why I opened the show today the way that I did, in that he's going to trust his own instincts here. To Kirby's credit, in most instances where teams have tried to use speed or quickness on the defensive line to negate the Georgia size, over the course of 4 quarters, we do see that start to wear down after time. Now, South Carolina's a different story because Kinlaw is apparently on his way to the NFL. But most games, though, have kind of gone the other way.
I would just bring up, South Carolina's defensive line, other than Auburn, is probably the only defensive line where they have a lot, especially on the interior, have a lot of guys that Georgia tried to or very much would have wanted to get. I know Florida has 2 good end rushers, but I'm not sure how good they are in terms of up the middle and getting pressure from the defensive tackles. But, Rick Sandage is a guy Georgia wanted for a long time and was in it until the end with him, and he ended up picking South Carolina. Zach Pickens is a guy out of South Carolina. He picked them early, but I'm sure Georgia would have loved to get their hands on him. Javon Kinlaw, his resume speaks for itself now. And, going forward, it'll be interesting to see if teams do sort of, try and out physical this offensive line and sort of, move them around. But, as Kirby said, some might see this as an excuse, but, Justin Schaefer, their starting guard, picks up a neck injury. Solomon Kinley, they put him out there. He's not ready to go. I don't think we're going to see that same sort of rotation this week. I think, I think now, like Kinley, and just seeing him have practice this week, he'll probably be like a break in case of emergency kind of usage this week, and my full expectation.
Who is this now?
Solomon Kinley.
Okay, yeah.
It'll be Thomas at left tackle, Cade Mays at left guard.
A little bit like what Wilson was for the Notre Dame game.
Yeah. And Wilson held up and has held up since. Kinley just was not able to hold up.
Yeah.
Trey Hill at center, Ben Cleveland at right guard, and Isaiah Wilson at right tackle.
Yeah.
I think that's the line we're going to see, and I think this is probably, assuming they are all able to stay healthy in this game, this will probably be the first time you don't see a ton of rotating. Jamari might come in as that 6th offensive lineman they've done sometimes, but I don't expect a whole lot of rotation going in this game.
You concerned at all about the fact that Salyer's not competing for a starting position more than he is right now, given the unrest that's gone on with injuries?
No, not really. I think we've always kind of felt that Ben and Cade, to this point, have been just a little bit better than Jamari, and the short answer is no. It's a very good room, and I know in this new age of transfer portal, people might be worried about him transferring out or leaving. I don't think that's the case with him. I just think, there's sort of a logjam right there now. And he did play a lot in that South Carolina game. I would just throw that out there.
Chase Smith says Mays and Cleveland both need to be in the game at the same time.
Yep.
And, yeah, I would agree with that, Chase. Sounds like a lot of folks agree with that there as well. J.C. Cole unhappy with Trey Hill. We certainly understand where that's coming from. Let's see how Hill bounces back from all of this, though. Let's check that out. Let's do 2 things before we go, and then we're going to get out the air. Jimmy Barnes brings up the 2020 receiver crop, asking if Georgia has any 5-stars on the way. One thing I'll point you to, Jimmy, is what Jeff can tell us about Marcus Rosemy, a UGA commit who's not a 5-star, but Jeff has said glowing things about Rosemy, that he's certainly, in Jeff's mind at least, close to being a 5-star. I would say he's the biggest and best playmaker of the Georgia receiving crop for the class of 2020, and then also add to that, if you have a chance to get Arian Smith, that's a speedy receiver that right now Clemson and Alabama both seem to covet. That's an interesting recruitment worth paying attention to. And as I told Jeff when he joined us on Tuesday, while initially I may have disregarded Corey Wren as receiver because he doesn't really play that position in high school, he's a little small. When you see what I think right now for Georgia is a bit of a dearth of speed, all of a sudden, admittedly, I'm a little bit more interested in a guy like Corey Wren than I would have been before.
Pick 2. These guys are uncommitted. You get to pick 2 of them. And I can tell you're already going to hate this. Darnell Washington, Arik Gilbert. Arian Smith. You got to pick Georgia to get 2 of those.
Unfortunately, I would pick the 2 that Georgia's the least likely to get because, as we talked about with Jeff yesterday, with Darnell Washington, at 270 pounds right now, that's a good guy to have on the field and going to be a valuable asset for Georgia because ultimately I think UGA is probably where he's headed. But I do believe that at the high school level, Gilbert is the more dynamic playmaker, and the fact that Alabama and Clemson seem to be as interested in Smith as they are right now. Clemson recently extending the offer, which usually means something given how judicious they are with stuff like that. I'm way more interested in Arian Smith than I was before because of that. He's kind of a little bit more of maybe of a polished receiver version of what you hope that Wren can be, that guy that really provides that speed and explosiveness. I mean, a few weeks ago, I wouldn't have cared one way or another if Georgia got Arian Smith or not. Wouldn't have turned him down, but just wasn't that motivated by him. He starts to feel like a player I sort of want Georgia to get a little bit more, and I'm watching guys like Marcus Roseman a little bit more closely now too, just given what we've kind of seen from the receivers thus far this season.
So with Gilbert, I almost wonder if you more consider, and I'm not saying you specifically, but do you consider him more as a wide receiver and a guy because I having seen a little bit more of him, I would say. As a guy who can split out, I think Gilbert was a little bit more polished and accomplished there. I wonder if you consider making the pitch to him now because Terrence Edwards is coming on our show and talked about this. I know we've talked to you about playing tight end. What if you just want to come here and play wide receiver for us because we have a pretty clear need there right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see the same thing with Gilbert you see with Pickens, big guy that's blanketed by 2 guys, but you just got to force it to him. I don't know what else to say. You can't not throw it to him just because he's in bracket coverage.
Jake was doing that, to his credit, was doing that a few times, and Pickens was able to come down with it.
And very close in a couple others. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's like normally you think of interceptions coming when a guy's forced the football into a tight spot. In this case, they didn't result in interceptions. Pickens almost made the catch. It was like the stuff that was actually resulting in interceptions was like, the kind of thing that you typically wouldn't think would go there, but that's water under the bridge now. Let me finish with Joseph Kennedy's comment. I do think this is kind of interesting. He basically asked the question of how does Jake Fromm bounce back after playing the game that he played on Saturday? Well, we know how he bounced back a year ago in the Florida game after really having some tough questions asked about him after the LSU game. We also know how great players in sports typically respond when they have some critics, when they have some doubters. It's kind of the, I don't want to compare Jake Fromm to Michael Jordan, but Jordan was always famous of inventing critics so he could go out there and have somebody to vanquish, some sort of foe to battle against. I'll give all of you a chance to respond to this, commenters too, but Connor, what do you think the response from Jake Fromm is after, I'm sure he's not spending a ton of time online, but he's going to hear some of what's being said, and he's probably even thinking worse than many are saying. How do you think he responds to the way that he's going to be questioned after this week?
First, we're positive this isn't United States Congressman Joseph Kennedy, correct?
Yeah. I don't know that for sure. I'm going to assume that it's not.
I have full confidence in belief that Fromm is going to come out and play very, very well. The South Carolina game, even just in the course of this year, is pretty clearly an aberration as far as what he's done. You look at what he did in the second half of the Notre Dame game. You look at what he did in the Tennessee game. Guys, I know it's not always great to talk about this, but, BA, there are just days you have – and I have bad days at work. BA,
sure.
You have bad days at work. It happens. It happened to Jake Fromm against South Carolina.
Well, not me.
But
the typical person.
Yeah, the average Joe, the me's of the world. And Jake just happened to have one of those. But, I think you can look back throughout his playing time. One of the things he's done really well is when he has had a bad game, and, he's had a few of those now, he has always bounced back and come back as a better player. Yeah. Auburn 2017, he was just not ready for that moment. Comes out, leads Georgia to a victory over Auburn in the SEC championship game, does a really good job in that Oklahoma game. Last year, and even, you could say he struggled in that Alabama game in the national title game. Played great against them when he saw them again in the SEC championship game last year. LSU really struggled that day. Almost, there's a case if you really want to break it down, he was worse in that LSU game than he was in South Carolina. Came back against Florida and played the best game in his career to that point. Fromm has shown that he's a guy who can bounce back and play well. And I would just point out, even in the course of that game when he was not playing well, when Georgia needed a touchdown drive in that fourth quarter, he led them on I believe a 13-play drive and got it done. Mm-hmm. He is a guy who he's not perfect, and he knows that, and he's, accepts that, but he's a guy who I would still take over 95% of the quarterbacks in the country right now.
Two quick comments from our Facebook team, and then I'll give a final thought myself. Kathy Aquavia Green says Fromm's a winner. He knows how to bounce back, and I think that she probably makes a pretty good point on that. James Bryant predicts that he may take some safe throws on Saturday early to sort of build his confidence and his stat line up, and then after that he'll be back to being the same old Jake. Here's the other thing I'll leave you with as well. I remember in spring of 2017 when Georgia first released a video on its official Twitter account of Eason and Fromm during practice, and it wasn't meant to be a comparison. It was a preview of G-Day with these two guys being the opposing quarterbacks. They did them for all the position groups, but it was interesting that they put Eason and Fromm in the same video because it was a side-by-side comparison. And the one thing I liked about Fromm immediately right away was the way that he was slapping helmets during practice. He was running over to guys, picking them up after they'd been tackled, and he was just very, very animated, really, really energetic, and I think that's something to watch for on Saturday. How visibly energetic does he look? Is he slapping helmets? Is he yelling at guys for the good and for the bad? Is he the most visible player on the field for Georgia? The Jake Fromm that sang Rocky Top after the Tennessee game is actually, I think, a pretty good version of Jake Fromm, and whatever you have to do to care less about the bad game you played before is probably a step in the right direction for Jake. This is no time to be more careful. It's a time to just sort of let it loose and let the chips fall where they may. No one ever succeeded in life by being even more careful than they'd been before. That's not a very good recipe for success. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I'm sure we'll see this, a loose, comfortable Jake Fromm. Hopefully it's quiet. I wouldn't even mind if it's a little cocky. I think that's the step for Jake Fromm. We've always compared quarterbacks to gunslingers. I think it's time for Fromm to be a little bit more of a gunslinger. And gunslingers don't have much of a conscience. They don't have much of a memory. They're just sort of in the moment. And Jake just being in the moment on Saturday and letting it ride, that's the Jake Fromm that not only do I want to see, I think that's the Jake Fromm that's most likely to be successful. Careful's just not working. It's not working for Jake, and it's not working for Georgia.
I think that's what plagued him against LSU a season ago, and I kind of think that's what plagued him in that South Carolina game. He was trying almost too hard not to make a bad play, and because of that, he just wasn't quite as effective as he has been.
I think careful is great advice for a lesser quarterback, but lesser is not what I think that Jake is. So on the off chance he were listening right now, I would say just let it rip, have a good time, and figuratively speaking, sing Rocky Top. I mean, just go out there and just enjoy yourself. And I think that's the right way to go. I hope all of you have enjoyed yourself as a part of the program here today. Thanks for being here. And, of course, don't forget, the same way you get updates on DawgNation here on DawgNation Daily, you can also get updates on your Atlanta news now when you check out AJC.com. A lot going on. There was a presidential debate last night. You can find out more information about that. There is more on the Falcons and their rough 1-5 start. A lot better to be 5-1 than 1-5, and that's what a lot of UGA fans are thinking about. Also, the fall means kind of cool stuff going on. Some of the local Atlanta restaurants. The AJC's got a big fall dining guide update for you. You can get all that Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Also, huge thanks to R.S. Andrews, bringing the R.S. Andrews cool down to you, air, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews for all of that, but particularly this time of year, that $99 furnace safety check to make sure your house is going to be in good working condition when you crank up that heat a little bit later on, maybe even tonight with temperatures expected down in the 40s. I'll see you tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Hope you all have a great day. I'll look forward to seeing you then.